So good morning. Today's daf is daf tet in Masechet Horayot. We are at the Mishnah on the bottom of Chet Amabet. So let's I think we can pretty much dive right in. So hold on just a second, and I'm going to share my screen. The Mishnah lists additional cases when a court's mistaken decision does not result in a special bull offering. So again, usually, as we saw in the first parak, and we've touched on the same topic in the second chapter. The first chapter was about a court that makes a mistake. Specifically, we saw that there's a debate, but in general, we say that it's referring to only the Sanhedrin Agadol that is in Yerushalayim. That Sanhedrin, if they make a mistake about a particular law and everybody follows their mistaken instruction and now violates that particular law, there is a bull offering that is offered. And as a result, all of the individuals who did the sin do not have to bring their own personal offering because it really wasn't on some level their fault. But there are certain circumstances where even if they do make a mistake, we're not going to offer a bull offering, and that's what our Mishnah is about to discuss. So Chet Amud Bet, Mishnah at the bottom. Ein chayavin al shmias kol. If in fact the mistake that the court makes is about shmias kol. Shmias kol is one of three, and we're going to see the other two are about to be listed. Three mitzvot that are subject to a korban olav yored. We saw this at some point in the last couple Masechtot. I apologize that I can't remember precisely. My memory is not as what it used to be. In any event, that the idea is that a korban olav yored is a variable korban depending on how wealthy one is. Okay. If one is wealthier, they'll bring a large animal. If they're less wealthy, they'll bring birds. And if they're less than that and they're really poor, then they can bring it in grain. Bring a meal offering. And so that is, and what's the sin? What's the hearing of a voice? It means I go up to you and I say, listen, I really need you to testify on my behalf. I know you're a witness that somebody borrowed money from me. And you say, I have no idea what you're talking about. But you know that you do know what I'm talking about. And you swear to the effect that you know that you say you don't know what I'm talking about, even though you really do. And eventually you want to do tshuva and admit it. And now, as a result, you've sinned. And so, what did the court do? On some level, the court said that if you deny saying something in this particular instance, you're not violating a law. And somehow, this is the crazy aspect of it, a majority of all of Israel engaged in that behavior. And now, as a result, you might have thought that the court would need to bring the bull offering for having for a para elam davar for having given the mistaken instruction. The answer is when it comes to an korban olav yored, we don't say that. And similarly, va'al bitui sfasayim, in connection with making a false oath, literally uttering with the lips. This refers to an oath that is false about the past or promises to do something in the future and then you purposely don't do it, or and so as a result, that also is going to be subject to a korban olav yored, a variable sin offering. And also, if the court were to give instructions with respect to it and be mistaken, we would not offer a par elam davar, a bull offering for the community. And finally, if the court were to say that in a certain circumstance this is not considered tameh, and as a result a majority of the Jewish people goes into the Beit HaMikdash, one can sort of see that happening if in the context of Ola being Ola L'Regel, with everybody coming up, all the Jewish people coming up for the holidays. Right. But in any event, the point is that, again, the mistaken instruction, and now as a result, either the Beis HaMikdash itself was, somebody went into the Beis HaMikdash itself while tameh, or they ate from a sacrifice while tameh, then that is going to be a situation where they're going to, again, an individual that did it would have to bring a korban olav yored, one of the variable sacrifices. But we're going to say a court that makes a mistake and leads to the community doing that does not offer the bull offering. Rather, presumably, you would every individual would have to bring his or her own sacrifice. V'hanasi kayotze behen, and the nasi is treated like them. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, you know what? Not only is it the court not going to be subject to this law, but even there's a Gemara right here. Even the king, the head of the nation, is not going to be subject to this law, and they would not have to bring any sacrifice whatsoever. Rabbi Akiva says, no, Hanasi chayav bekulan. No, the Nasi actually is obligated in all three. That if the Nasi were to be asked to testify, well, we're going to see, except chutz mishmiyas kol, except for when the first one of shmiyas kol, that if in fact the Nasi, is asked to testify on your behalf and swears that he doesn't know anything, he's still not going to be subject to to a korban ola v'yored, because shamelech lo dan v'lo daninoso, lo meid v'lo meidinoso. We can't judge. He can't sit in. We can't judge him, and he can't judge others, and he can't testify, and we can't testify against him. And so, as a result, you need help finding it, let me know. And so as a result, that's what we got. Now, we didn't get anything interestingly, even though this perek is called Hora Kohen Mashiach, that it's referring to the Kohen Gadol who taught a law and then violated his, taught that a law was particular in a particular way, and he was mistaken, and he goes ahead and he acts upon it, and we say that he's going to have to bring a par as well, a special offering, notwithstanding that fact that this is the chapter of Hora Kohen HaMashiach. We did not mention the Kohen Gadol in our opening in this Mishnah that we begin with today. Again, now we're going to take a look in the Gemara, and the Gemara will touch on on how the Kohen Gadol relates. But the bottom line is that we have two opinions in our Mishnah. Opinion number one is the court. Everybody agrees court exempt from everything, from every korban ola v'yored. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that the Nasi is also exempt from all of them. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, says you're exempt from the Shmiyas Kol, from testifying, the oath associated, the korban associated with violating an oath about testimony, but you're not. But the Nasi is not exempt when it comes to Bitoy Sfasayim and Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav. And then we'll see that there's actually going to be a third opinion in a moment. Amar Ula, my time at the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Why does Rabbi Yossi Aglili say that the Nasi is exempt from all three? Here, let me put the Gemara right there. Okay, so why are we? So Amar Kra, we're right at the Gemara, so we'll begin the Gemara again. Amar Ula, my time at the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Amar Kra, v'hayaki esham la'achas me'ela. That when it comes to discussing these three korbanot and the sacrifices that one needs to do, it groups them together, and so it says, and it will be when one will become guilty regarding one of these sins. So as a result, kol shemischayeb ba'achas mischayeb b'kulan. In order for you to be subject to any of them, you need to be subject in all of them. If you're not liable for any one of them, then you cannot be liable for any of them. So as a result, because a Nasi is not going to be liable for one of them, specifically, as we saw at the end of the Mishnah, as Rabbi Akiva even agrees, the king is not going to be judged, and he can't testify or testify against. Well, then, as a result, he can't be subject to the sin of Shmiyas Kol. And so as a result, because he can't be subject to the sin of Shmiyas Kol, we're not going to let him be subject to any of the sins of these three sins that are subject to the korban ola v'yored. 1 second. Well, how do you know that this verse, "V'hayaki Hashem la'achas me'ela," that it means that it has to be that you're all of them or you're none of them? Maybe la'achas me'ela means that any one of them is sufficient. After all, it says one achas. No, all right, so you're right. Maybe you can't necessarily bring a definitive proof from that, but we are going to bring the proof from this same concept. But we have a brisa, Titania. Haya Rabbi Yirmiyah, Omer Rabbi Yirmiyah used to say, Nemar, what we have in the pasuk, Lo sagia yado. A person cannot suffice to pay. If he doesn't have enough money to buy the sheep or the goat, then he's going to use two turtle doves or young doves as the sacrifice. The Ne'amar v'lo sasig yado, and then it goes beyond that and says, you know what? If he can't afford even the two turtle doves or young doves, then again, his means are inadequate. Misha bali de anius v'ashirus. So what does this all suggest? It only applies where somebody is capable of being poor or rich. Meaning Yatza, Nasi, Umashiach. But you know what? You know who can't become poor? A king. And you know who can't become poor? The Kohen Gadol. She'ein ba'im lidei aniyut. Neither of them can become poor. And so as a result, what we see from this is, first of all, we've now answered what the story is with the Kohen Gadol, because even though we didn't have the Kohen Gadol in our Mishnah, it's clear that Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who would say that the Nasi is like the court, would also say the Kohen HaMashiach is like the court, understanding it according to Rabbi Yirmiyah. But now we need to prove it. How do we know that a Nasi can't become poor? And how do we know that a Kohen Gadol can't become poor? So that's what the Gemara does next. Nasi, the proof that the Nasi can't become poor, Diksiv asa achas mikol mitzvot Hashem Elokav, in connection, this is Pasuk Vayikra Perak Dalid Pasuk Kaf Bet, where it says that if a Nasi were to violate one of these mitzvot, and who is that is a Nasi? Mi she'ein al gabav el Hashem Elokav. Meaning, why does it say Hashem Elokav, singular, his God? It's because he's the only one. There's no one between him and God. And so as a result, who is it that only has no one between him and God? That's the king. And why is that the case? Because there's nobody who's going to be wealthier than the king. Mashiach, when it comes to the Kohen HaMashiach, the anointed Kohen, namely the Kohen Gadol, Tiksiv, because it says, Kohen HaGadol Me'achav. This is also in Vayikra, but this is Vayikra Perek Kaf Aleph Pasuk Yud in Parshas Emor, I think. Shehu Gadol Me'achav B'noi B'Koach B'Chachma U'V'Osher. We have a brisa that says that the Kohen Gadol is supposed to be above all of his brothers in strength, in beauty, in wisdom, and wealth. And Acherim Omrim, not only do you have to, is it the fact that the person is chosen to be that way, meaning based on those factors, but Menayin She'im Ein Lo Gadol Lehu Mishel Echav. I'm sorry, Mishe'im Ein Lo Gadol Mishel Echav. That how do I know that if he lacks, that we're going to use his brother's assets in order to make him the wealthiest Kohen? That's because Talmud Omer about Kohen HaGadol Me'achav. Meaning, Hagadol Me'achav, the greater from his brothers, suggests that there's an aspect of from his brothers, Asher Yitzhak al Rosho, meaning that the person is going to be anointed, that they poured on his head the anointing oil, but it's through his brothers. Gadlehu, they are going to make him greater, Me'achav, through his brother's actions, namely by giving him additional money. And so as a result, even if he doesn't currently have the most money among the Kohanim, they're going to change it so that he does have the most money among the Kohanim. So, by Mine Ravina, me Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Nasi Shenitztar. So now we have, so that was the end of that. And again, we now see that according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili and Rabbi Yirmiyah, we would say that that even a Kohen Gadol would also not be subject to any of the three Korban Olah V'Yorids. On the other hand, that is not necessarily the case according to Rabbi Akiva. So, by Mine Rav, yes, I'm sorry, was there a question? Okay. By Mine Ravina me Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Nashi Shenitztara. So if you have a king that gets tsaras? Well, we're going to see, I think tomorrow, that in fact the king who has tsaras is effectively demoted during the time of his tsaras because he has to be sort of sent out of the community because of the tsaras. So as a result, he is not able to rule. So Mahu, what's the law? And we're going to bring a proof from a pasuk in Malachim Bet to that effect. Midcha, and Rashi is going to quote it for us in a moment. Midcha dachi. Do we say that his ability, and this is a one way of understanding this in the psukim. There are a couple of different in the Gemara. There are a couple of different ways that the Gemara can be understood, but we're going to understand it according to one of the ways that Rashi notes. And so, do we say that the king's ability to push things off is a permanent ability and is therefore it's completely docha? Miftar pater, or is he only exempt when he is king? And Rashi has it clarifies the question for us very clearly. First narrow line on Tedamid Aleph in the Rashi. Nasi shenitztara l'Rebbe Yirmiyah l'Rebbe Yossi Aglili. That this is following according to Rebbe Yossi and Rebbe Yirmiyah. De'avar minisiyoso. He leaves his kingship. She'ein roy liot melech. Because he's no longer fit to be king. Kishehu mitzora, when he has tsaras. Kida amrin l'kaman beperek, although it's a perek haba, I guess. V'yinaga Hashem es hamelech, that Hashem afflicted the king. V'yihi mitzora ad yom moso, and he ended up being having tsarat until his death. Vayashav bebeit hachavshi, and he stayed in the house of freedom. And what do we understand from the house of freedom? Dimashma, that implies he was free from the obligations of being king. And so as a result, that's how we know that in fact a nasi who begets tsaras is going to no longer be king. So Mahu, continuing on in Rashi, next Rashi, mi amrina pater mikarban ola. Do we say that he is exempt from having to bring a carbon ola v'yored, a sacrifice of a variable sin offering, kishehu nasi, just as when he was the king, v'achshav kinshenitztara and that was true when he was king. V'achshav kinshenitztara, but now that he has tsaras, da'avar minisiyaso, when he was no longer king, lichayev, do we say that he's chayev? So we see that the word pater in the context of the question in the Gemara, imiftar pater, is a reference to, well, maybe he's only exempt while he's king and not permanently. O dilma, my dahavi. Or do we say no? What was? Kishehu nasi, meaning the same way that he was kishehu nasi. What is what was. Just as was the king, we say that he's now the king. Kolomer hoel v'nidcha yidcha kishenitztara. That just as it was effectively fully pushed off when he was not when he was the king, so too, even when he has tsaras, it will still similarly be pushed off. And then again, Rashi offers an alternative interpretation, but for our purposes, that is going to suffice for the moment. So Amar Lei, so the Ravina says back to, I'm saying Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says back to Ravina, Dilach o de Gaza. Well, 1 second. Who is he going to pay from? This is a rhetorical question, and a number of different ways that we can understand. Is he going to pay from your funds or from his own funds? Now, the way I understand it, we'll do a couple, both Rashi and Tosas HaRash. So Rashi explains, Amar Lei, next Rashi down, it's about... well, I know, I'm going to skip that. That was the other alternative explanation for how we can understand midcha dachi o miftar pater. But if we go down to the next Rashi of Amar Lei, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down from where we were in the Rashi. Mimai kabayis l'chiyuvei la'atuye korban. From the fact that you're asking this question, that maybe he needs to bring a sacrifice, kishenitzdaro, that when he has tsaras, mimamon shalach o mimamon de Gaza. Is he going to use your money or is he going to use the coffers of the king, de Gaza de day, of his own? Habi Omer Migaza Day. Of course, he's going who to buy la suye. He's going to, of course, use his own coffers. But Kavan de Migaza Day Kavai la suye. Since the money is going to come from his coffers, Amatu lahachi pater. It must be that he's exempt legamri completely from the carbon olav from this carbon, because he's not using the limited assets of you as an individual. Rather, he's using the unlimited assets of the royal purse. And so, as a result, that's how we're going, and that's how Rashi understands dilach o digaza. That it means, is he like you? Is he like a person, a private person, and therefore going to do it? That this is what Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Yossi would say. Yatsa nasi umashiach. That both a king and the Kohen Gadol, she'ein ba'in lidei anyot, they don't have the ability of becoming poor. Hai nasi sheninstaranami, eino ba lidei anyot. Similarly, a king, even if he has saras, is never going to be able to be poor. De gaza didei, because he has the same access to even though he's no longer king, he still has access to the king coffers, and the king coffers will never be empty. And so as a result, and so as a result, he would still be exempt. That is one way. That is why Rashi reads this. The Tosas Rush disagrees. He says, hey, I won't go with it inside, but it's on the right-hand side of your page, inside the Gemara. But he says, no, it's the exact opposite. Actually, what Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak is answering is that really the Nasi is chayiv in this situation if he becomes a Mitzorah. And as a result, he is going to have to bring the Karban Ola V'Yored, because you know what? He can no longer have the power of the taxation. And so as a result, he's exactly like you. When it says dilach o digaza, what he's saying is it like you, meaning does he now have limited funds, or digaza, or does he have unlimited funds? And the answer is no, it's like you, he's unlimited. And I'll offer now a third interpretation, that the point is dilach o digaza. The bottom line, this is more like Rashi than like the Tosas HaRush, that in fact, it doesn't make a difference. Often when the Gemara asks a question, Dilach o Digaza, the answer is because it doesn't make a difference. If he takes from his own coffers or he takes from you, you meaning the entire Jewish people, he is never going to run out of money. He can take wherever he wants, because at the end of the day, he still has the power of taxation. He still has the power, or through the kingship, even though he may not be the king, through the kingship, he still has, and given his access to the king's funds, he still has the power for taking whatever he wants. And so as a result, therefore, he's not going to be subject to the Karban Ola V'Yored. Okay.
Who's he taking it from? He's taking it from the...
So the simple answer is that according to Rashi, he's taking it from the king coffers. The king coffers can never run out of money, and as a result, he can't be subject to the poorest person's sacrifice, namely the sacrifice of the sacrifice of grain, of wheat, the mincha offering, the meal offering. And as a result, because he could never be subject to that sacrifice, and frankly, he probably shouldn't be subject to the dove's sacrifice either, because he's that wealthy. So the point is that therefore, because he's not subject to one of them, so then he's not subject to the entire thing. And because he's not subject to the entire thing, so that is the basis, part of the basis for why we would say that a king is not going to be covered by any of the Karban Ola V'Yoreds, and therefore he's not going to be subject to bringing a Karban Ola V'Yored. Again, this is according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yirmiyah.
Yeah. And what's the alternative to the king's coffers?
Well, the alternative to the king's coffers is that when we say dilach, it means that he's like a regular person who can run out of money. And so as a result, of course, it's going to end up coming from the king's coffers. But the point is that is he like you in that he's got limited resources? And that's where the Tosas Rush says, yeah, he is like you, his limited resources, because he doesn't have the ability to tax. Effectively, that's the debate between Tosas Rush and Rashi. Okay. And I will note that the Tosas Rush is the one who offers this explanation. This other alternative explanation is actually the Ramah, and even the Tosafos of Rush actually says that the Rashi's answer in the context of the Gemara makes more sense. But in any event, that is a little bit of additional background on that. Okay, so now our Mishnah didn't mention the Kohen Gadol. We now are going to address that directly. Again, we impliedly addressed it with respect to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, that of course, just as the Nasi would not be obligated in anyone, similarly the Kohen Gadol would not be. But what about Rabbi Akiva? Tanya, Rabbi Akiva Omer Mashiach Pater Mikulan, that actually the Kohen Gadol is exempt from all of them. So unlike the king, right, in our Mishnah, the Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva Omer Hanasi Chayev Bekulan, and here we're going to have Rabbi Akiva says Mashiach Pater Mikulan. So Amarava, my time of the Rabbi Akiva, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Akiva? Meaning, unlike Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who treats them exactly the same, Rabbi Akiva treats them completely differently. So Amrakra, Zeh Karban Aaron Uvanav, because it says that in connection with the mincha offering that Kohanim bring, that the Kohen Gadol brings every day, Zo Ba'chovalo. This is the offering that is, and specifically it's a meal offering. This is the meal offering that he is subject to. The Ein Acheres Ba'chovalo. But he cannot be subject to bringing any other meal offering. Well, guess what could potentially be a meal offering? Korban Olav Yored could potentially be a meal offering if it's the poorest version of it. So the Ema Kimayat Le Rachmana Midali Dalos. Well, maybe that's the point. Maybe it's only that it's saying that he can't possibly bring the poorest of the poor offerings. Umaynu Asiris Ha'efa. And what form is that? That's the 10th of the Efa. Aval Anios Ba'ashiros. But maybe the regular poor person who brings doves or turtle doves, and the one who's rich, maybe they are not excluded from this. And so as a result, maybe the Kohen Gadol should bring either the turtle doves or the larger animal. No, lo salkadai, don't think that. That the Kohen's going to provide atonement for his sin that he committed through one of these offerings. That the reference to the offerings is in the aggregate. That if you're subject to one, then you're subject to all. But if any one of the three different levels doesn't apply to you, well then all three don't apply to you. Well, Elamiata, Bahaya Sham Achas Me'ele. But 1 second, when it comes to, with respect to the prohibitions of the three sins, right, of the Korban Olav Yored, it refers to the guilty with respect to them. And so as a result, Hakanami called a Miskaya Ba'achas Miskaya Bekulan. Maybe when we say that you're liable for one, you're liable for all of them. V'she'ein Miskaya Ba'achas, ein Miskaya Bekulan. And if you're not liable for one, then you're not liable for all of them. Alama Tanan. But we know Rabbi Akiva Omer, Nasi Chayev Chutz Mishmias Kol. But the Nasi says that you're only, when it came to Rabbi Akiva, he said that the king is not subject to being forced to testify and an oath associated with that, and falsely swearing in that situation, because we said that the king can't testify and can't be testified against. And so as a result, based on the logic that you just used to explain why, according to Rabbi Akiva, the Kohen Gadol is not subject to any of these three sacrifices, maybe we should say the same thing associated with the Nasi, because the Nasi is not subject to all three of the sins, and so as a result, because he's not subject to the testifying sin, so Abaye v'Rava to Amri Tarvaya. So although Abaye and Rava often argue, here they agree and they provide a single common answer. Me'achas mashmalei, le'achas lo mashmalei. No, you have to be careful, because in one place it says me'achas, And there we're going to say that it means if you don't have all of them, you don't get any of them. And the other one is leachas. When we talked about the sins in the pasuk, this is the pasuk in Perek Hey, pasuk Hey, that Bahaya Ki Hasham leachas. Well, that is le, and me are different letters and have different implications associated with it. But the Gemara wonders, Umay Shname Achas Demashmali. Well, what is it about the mem that it makes it different? And it turns out it's not the mem or the lamed, it's the location in the Torah. De kasve rachmana libesof. No, when it has the mem at the very end, so that is telling you on a summary basis that if you're not subject to any one of these, well, then you're not going to be subject to the others. Gabi asirit haifa. That one is referenced with respect to the 1/10 of an ephah, which is the last of the three. It's the poorest of the poor. That if you're subject to that last one, well, then you're going to be subject to all of them. But if you're not subject to that last one, and a Kohen and a king are not going to be subject to the last one, well, then you're not going to be subject to any of them. Because if you say that 1 second, that once you are liable for one, you can be liable for all of them. Well, you know what? We should have written, if we wanted to mean that if you're subject to one, then you're subject to that one. Well, we could have written that verse earlier, maybe with respect to the doves or the turtle doves slash turtle doves, or inami ba'ashirus, or we could have referenced it in this discussion of the wealthy person's form of the sacrifice with the animals. And so as a result, the fact that we waited until the very end shows that you're either subject to all of them or you're subject to none of them. And so that's why the Kohen Gadol is not going to be subject to any of them at all. And again, Rabbi Akiva would not use the drasha that we used about being poor, about the king can't be poor. That's not his basis. He's not using it, but rather he's using it based on the fact that by the Kohen Gadol, it says that this is the meal offering, and so as a result, only one meal offering can a Kohen Gadol do. That's the meal offering that he offers every day. He's not going to be subject to a different kind of meal offering, and therefore he's not subject to the Korban Olah v'Yored at all, but a king will be subject to a Korban Olah v'Yored, both with respect to Bitois Vasayim, if he makes a false oath, and Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav, and also to contaminating, making tameh the base of bringing tuma into the base Hamikdash, and eating in tuma the various sacrifices. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah, and the Mishnah provides
There's no chiyuv on the Kohen Gadol at all for
a Korban Olah v'Yored. That's correct. According to Rabbi Akiva, we are going to see that there is a third opinion. We're going to get to that at the end of this Mishnah.
But is there a chiyuv upon him, a different type of korban? If it's not Korban Olah v'Yored?
Excellent question. Excellent question. In the end, we are going to see at the very end of today that we're going to see that the answer is yes, that he still would have to bring a par. He would still have to bring a bull. That is an excellent question, and we are going to get there, God willing. So, kol mitzvah shebator shechayvin al zidon kares al shiggosan shkatas. Any mitzvah that you're subject to kares if you do it intentionally, and you're going to get a sin offering if you do it inadvertently. So hayachid maybe kispa usira. An individual brings either a female lamb or a female goat. Vahanasi sa'ir. A nasi, the king, brings a male goat. Umashiach, and the Kohen Gadol, based in maybe in par. They bring a bull. But if it involves idolatry, that all the individual, the nasi and the Kohen Gadol, all bring the she goat, a female goat, who based in par v'sa'ir, and a based in brings the bull and the he goat par la'olah v'sa'ir l'chatas, a bull as an olah and the he goat as a sin offering, and that is their sacrifice. Asham taloi, again, an asham taloi is if I know that I ate this piece of meat, but now all of a sudden I'm unsure whether that piece of meat was either kosher or not kosher, and so as long as I don't know, I have to bring an Asham Talui. And then when I discover, oh, yes, it was in fact not kosher, well, then I would have to bring a sin offering. So an Asham Talui, Hayachid v'Hanasi Chayavin, both the individual and the king can be subject to it. U'Mashiach, but a Kohen Gadol, U'Beis Din Paturin, but neither the Kohen Gadol nor a Beis Din could ever be subject to a korban as a result of a Asham Talui situation. Asham Vadai, what about a definitive Asham? Those are offerings such as after Matzorah, and other kinds of sins. There are certain sins that you have to bring a definitive sacrifice, a definitive Ola. We have them in the Karbanos referenced in the beginning of davening. Hayachid v'Hanasiv v'Mashiach chayavin. An individual, the king, and the Kohen Gadol are all subject to those kinds of sacrifices. U'Beis Din Paturin, but a Beis Din is not. Meaning, if they make a mistaken law associated with those, that's not going to trigger a paralam davar for them. Al Shmiyas Hakol, Al Bitois Vasayim, Al Tumas Mikdash V'Kodashav. When it comes to the three different sins of a Korban Ola V'Yored, namely testimony, swearing falsely about testimony, swearing falsely generally, and making the Beis Hamikdash Tameh, based in Paturin, a court is not going to be subject to them, as we saw in the last Mishnah. But a Nasi, the Kohen Gadol, and the king, the Kohen Gadol, and an individual are all going to be liable. So this is a third opinion. Elishein Kohen Gadol Mashiach Chayev al Tumas Mikdash v'Kodashav. Except that a Kohen Gadol is not subject for making the Beis Hamikdash Tameh. Divrei Rabbi Shimon. That's what Rabbi Shimon says. Okay, Uma Hein Mivian. Now, what sacrifice do they bring? Does a Kohen Gadol and the Nasi bring in the case of a Korban Ola V'Yored? Meaning, are they subject to the specific offering? After all, Rabbi Shimon just said that you're subject, that these, both the Kohen Gadol and the Nasi, are subject to the to Korban Ola V'Yored, with the exception that the Kohen Gadol is not subject to contamination of the Beis Hamikdash. But so what sacrifice do they bring? According to Rabbi Shimon, Korban Ola V'Yored, they bring the same variable sacrifice that anybody else would bring. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Hanasi maybe Sayer. And then Rabbi Eliezer says, no, the Nasi brings a he-goat. And we're going to see exactly what that means in a moment. But he says that he brings the korban that he would bring if he did a different kind of sin, as we will see in the next chapter of Maseches Horayot, God willing, tomorrow. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon Hayanosin Klal, Rabbi Shimon. So now we're going to have Rabbi Shimon's opinion detailed further in our Mishnah. So again, we now have a three-way machlokes in of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. On the one hand, he thinks that the Nasi and the Kohen Gadol are exempt from sin offerings for all three sins that are subject to a variable sin offering. Rabbi Akiva thinks that the Kohen Gadol is exempt from all of them, while the king is only exempt from hearing a voice, from the testimony situation. And Rabbi Shimon thinks that they're all liable for all of them, except that the Kohen Gadol is exempt from contaminating the Beit HaMikdash. And we'll see that the Nasi, he agrees with Rabbi Akiva that the Nasi is also exempt in connection with testimony. Mm-hmm. But all right, so Tanya, Rabbi Shimon Hayanos and Klal, and we're going to see this now in this brisa that we're going to quote. Kol hayachsha yachid ba'asham talui, any individual who's subject to an asham talui, hanasi kiyotzebo, the Nasi is also going to be liable. Mashiach ubeis din paturin, but the Kohen Gadol and the court are going to be exempt. And when it comes to an asham vadai, a definitive asham, Nasi Mashiach kayotze behen, a king and a Kohen Gadol are similarly liable, just like a regular person. Based in Paturin, but the Beis Din is going to be exempt. When it comes to the three sins of a Korban Ola V'Yored, based in Paturin, the Beis Din is going to be exempt from all three. Nasi Mashiach Chayavin, the king and the Kohen Gadol are subject to all three, with the following exceptions. El she'ena Nasi Chayav b'shmiyas kol, but the king is not subject to being forced to testify. And the V'Kodashav, and the Kohen Gadol is not subject to the making the temple, the Beis Hamikdash Tameh. And so as a result, we see that each of them are subject to two of the mitzvot. The Nasi is subject to Bitoy Sosayim and Tumas Hamikdash, and the Mashiach, Kohen Mashiach, is subject to Shmiyas Kol and Bitoy Sosayim. Kol Shehu Ba'ol V'Yored, and now For some reason, this Barisa continues and says anyone who is subject to a korban olav yored, but we just had that in the previous case. Nasi kiyotzibo, the nasi is similarly liable. Mashiach based in Peturin, but the Kohen Gadol and the Beis Din are patur. So in second, Hagufal Kasha, we have an internal inconsistency. You just said that the Kohen Mashiach is not going to be subject to being liable when it comes to the causing the Beis Hamikdash to be tamei. Betumas mikdash v'kodashav the pater. It seems like he's only exempt with respect to causing the Beis Hamikdash to be tamei. Aval b'shmiyas hakol v'tus l'sayim chayav, but he would be liable according to the third rule in this brisa, based on coming to testify or uttering a false oath. Ema Seifa, but then in the last of the cases of the fourth case of this brisa, Kol Shehu Ba'olav Yored Nasi Kayotzebo Mashiach Based in Peturim. We say that a Mashiach, namely the Kohen Gadol, is exempt. Katani Mashiach Based in Peturim, and we say then together that the Kohen Gadol and the Beis Din are both patur. Ma Based in Peturim Mikul Hon. Doesn't it imply that just as the Beis Din is patur from all three of them, Af Mashiach patur Mikul Hon, or so too all three are going to, the Kohen Gadol is going to also be patur from all three. So Kashyan Adadi, there's a question on internal question on itself as we turn to Ted Amabet. Rav Huna grade the Rav Yoshua. So Rav Huna answers lo kasha. No, it's not difficult. Kan b'dalos. Now, when it says that he's going to be liable, it means with the poor person's version, namely with the turtle doves or the doves or something more than that, namely the animals. Kan b'dalidalos. But when it says that he's totally exempt, it's referring to the poorest of the poor, namely that he cannot offer the korban, the korban mincha. Thank you so much. But Rabbi Shimon savar la Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Shimon is agreeing with Rabbi Akiva b'chada upalagale b'chada. He agrees with Rabbi Akiva in one aspect, and he disagrees with him in one aspect. Savar la Rabbi Akiva b'dali dalos. He agrees with Rabbi Akiva that when it says in the connection with the Kohen Gadol's daily offering that this is the mincha offering of the Kohen Gadol, it means that the Kohen Gadol cannot be subject to any other mincha offering. But the pater, that he's exempt with respect to bringing that kind of sacrifice. Upalagala b'dalos. But he also disagrees because whereas Rabbi Akiva says that once you're not subject to one version of the korban olav yored, you cannot be subject to any version of the korban olav yored. The Rabbi Shimon says no, it's only the mincha version of the korban olav yored that the Kohen Gadol is pater, but the other versions he could be liable to. Okay. So Ela she'ein Kohen Gadol chayiv. So we then said that the Kohen Gadol is not liable for making the Beis Hamikdash tamei. So Amar Chizkiah, my time of the Rabbi Shimon. What is the basis for Rabbi Shimon saying that the Kohen Gadol cannot make the Beis Hamikdash, cannot violate the prohibition of making the Beis Hamikdash tamei and be subject to a korban olav yored? Because it says in connection in Bamidbar, pasuk Perek Yutet pasuk Kaf, it says that the person who contaminates the Beis Hamikdash is going to be cut off from the congregation. Mishit karbano shava lakal. It needs to be somebody who has a same sacrifice that's associated with the congregation. Yatzazeh she'ein karbano shava lakal. But who is excluded? Well, excluded is the Kohen Gadol because his korban is not like the rest of the congregation. Well, what is that talking about? So fortunately, Rashi tells us Yatza, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 lines down about in the narrow lines of Rashi. Yatza on the right-hand side of the page. Yatza, Mashiach, that the Kohen Gadol is excluded. She'ein karbano shava, his sacrifice is not similar. De'ein miskaper b'shel kal b'kaparas Yom Kippurim. Maybe this is a little bit of a Dav Yomi coincidence. We're only 4 weeks away from Yom Kippur. So in fact, his sacrifice is different from everybody else's sacrifice on Yom Kippur. To whom is kaper b'par v'heim b'seir. That his sacrifice on Yom Kippur is a bull, while everybody else's is a he-goat. So im kain nasi nam. No, it's not the seir mishtalech, but with the seir mishtalech, there is a seir that the seir that's Lashem is is the sacrifice. So im kain nasi nami ein karbono shaveh l'kal. There may also be another one, but I'm not. I'm not in the sugya at the moment. But yes, the basic idea is exactly what you're saying. So im kain nasi nami ein karbono shaveh l'kal. Once again, the king also gives a different korban, not during Yom Kippur, but on other days. He brings a different korban. Shaveh b'kapara to Yom Kippur. No, but on Yom Kippur is what matters, and on Yom Kippur the nasi is equal to everybody else. Well, im kain kohanim nami lo shavuk l'kal b'kapara de Yom Kippur. You're saying that Yom Kippur is what matters, but you know what sacrifice is made for the kohanim on Yom Kippur? Not just the Kohen Gadol, the same bull sacrifice that the Kohen Gadol makes for himself, he makes for all kohanim. So no, kohanim shavu l'kahal b'shar mitzvos hashana kula. Nah, but kohanim offer, every regular Kohen offers the same korban for any sin that they make during the rest of the year. Well, Mashiach Nami. Well, now the Kohen Gadol also does that. Hashava b'shar mitzvos deshana. He also has to bring offerings if he does a regular sin throughout the rest of the year. No, ela amar Rava ema hachi. Here's what we're trying to say. Mi shechataso shaval lichidim umay nihu kal. No, what it's saying is that who is it that has the same sacrifices as an individual that constitutes the entire community? That is, that would include the Nasi, but does not include a Kohen Gadol. A Kohen Gadol is not liable for a chatas like everyone else because it depends on his ruling. Rashi explains that the idea is that when it comes to a regular person, if they just go and do the sin and they don't realize what they were doing, they're going to have to offer a sin offering. But a Kohen Gadol who just goes and does the sin and didn't realize what he's doing, he doesn't offer a sin offering. He offers nothing. It's only if he makes a ruling and then sins is he going to be subject to it.
So he's patur completely from a sin offering?
We're gonna see. That's exactly what we're gonna get to next. Well, it's a machlokas is the bottom line. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer Hanasi may be seir. So Rabbi Eliezer said that the nasi brings a seir. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We're gonna have now two rulings of Rabbi Yochanan. Lo Amar Rabbi Eliezer Ela betumas mikdash b'kodashav. When he says that the king brings a nasi, that is only with respect to the.
What do you mean king brings it?
I mean, sorry, that the king brings a korban olav yored, when it says that he brings, when the nasi brings a seir, a he-goat, my apologies, thank you for clarifying, that when Rabbi Eliezer says that the nasi brings a he-goat, it is talking about as a variable offering, instead of the variable offering, I should note, it's only in connection with making the Beis HaMikdash Tameh. Hoel v'nemar kares o bo kavik. That just as kares is mentioned with respect to every other sin for which one is subject to a korban chatas, it is also mentioned in connection with making the Beis HaMikdash Tameh, even though making the Beis HaMikdash Tameh is subject to a korban olav yored. But given the fact that kares is also mentioned by making the Beis HaMikdash Tameh, we're going to say that just like a king offers a bull if he, offers a he-goat if he sins accidentally sins in connection with any other mitzvah for which one would be subject to kares, for this mitzvah as well, even though ordinarily an ordinary person would be subject to a korban olav yored, when it comes to making the Beis HaMikdash Tameh, since it says kares by it, we're going to say that the nasi is also subject to the same offering that he would make with respect to any other sin that is subject to kares, namely a he-goat. So Amar Rav Papa, Hachinami Mistaber. You know what? That makes a lot of sense. Because if you were to tell me that Rabbi Eliezer was talking not just about causing the Beis HaMikdash to be tameh, but he was talking about all the different sins of causing a korban olav yored, and in particular in connection with uttering a false oath, michdi. Let's take a look at it. Seir nasi upar Mashiach b'makom yachid lechatas kai. The nasi's he-goat and the Kohen Gadol's bull take the place of a regular person's fixed korban chatas, the female lamb or the female goat that a regular person would do. Nisne nami Mashiach mavipar. So it should have said that the Kohen Gadol when the Kohen Gadol does a regular sin, he's going to bring a bull offering. And this is the answer to your question that based on this, that we're saying that the Kohen Gadol would bring a bull instead of a sin offering. B'shmias kol ubitois vasayim. And when would we do it? So we would do it in connection with hearing a voice, namely being called to testify and swearing falsely about that, or swearing falsely, uttering a false oath in connection with the past or the future action. Elamidolo katani Mashiach. But given that Rabbi Eliezer only references the case, only references the king and bringing a he-goat, and doesn't mention the fact that the Kohen Gadol needs to bring a bull, Shmamina atumas mikdash v'kadashav kai. Maybe he's only talking about the causing the Beis Hamikdash to be tummy, the Mashiach patur, because in fact, where the Kohen Gadol is not subject to bringing any sacrifice in that situation, because the Kohen Gadol is not subject, as we saw just a few moments ago, is not subject to any sacrifice offering for causing Tuma to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash. So Amar Le Rav Huna, Braid the Rav Nasan, Le Rav Papa. 1 second, Mimai. How do you know that in fact your proof is a good proof? Dilma Rabbi Eliezer al Kul Honkai. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer is referring to all the different categories of bringing a variable sin offering. Umashiach Savar La Rabbi Akiva, and he thinks like Rabbi Akiva. And what did we see? Rabbi Akiva thinks the Amar Mashiach Pater B'Kulan. He thinks that you would be exempt from all of those. No, Amar Le, Rabbi Akiva, mi pater le mi par? No. Do you think that Rabbi Akiva would say that you're exempt from bringing a par, meaning that you would be totally exempt from bringing any sacrifice? So notwithstanding the fact that throughout the vast majority of this chapter, it appeared that if a Kohen Gadol did a sin, he would be subject to no sin offering whatsoever. No, that's not accurate. He would still be subject to a par, to bringing a bull. The Sulo Midi, there's nothing more to say about it. That is in fact the case. The Kohen Gadol is subject to a par. Okay, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, we got to finish up.
As a chata?
As a chat, essentially as a chatas, correct. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Moda Rabbi Eliezer, She'ain maybe Asham Tali. Rabbi Eliezer would agree that there is no obligation to bring an Asham Talui for a Nasi. Well, 1 second. Tani Tana, Kamei the Rav Sheshes.
But it doesn't say Talui, it just says Asham.
Asham Taloi is if you take a look at the bet, Masoras Hashas, it adds it in. Thank you so much for pointing that out. I didn't. Okay. So on Asham Tali. So the Tani Tana made the Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes was brought a brisa Asham Tali Ba'al Tumas Mikdash Mukadashav that says that you do bring an Asham Tali for potential contamination of the Beis Hamikdash. Meaning, if you're unsure whether you're Tameh and then you walk into the Beis Hamikdash, you will be subject to the king will be subject to an Asham Tali. So Amar Le to Amar Lachmani, who said this? Rabbi Eliezer, Damar. You think it's Rabbi Eliezer who says Hoel B'Ne'amar Bo Karis Kivikuvu, that just as we treat a korban that the sin of making things tameh, because it has the word kares next to it, maisi nasi sa'ir alei, that we say that the king will bring a he-goat as a result, and therefore just as he brings a he-goat, we're also going to say that he's going to be subject to an asham taloi. No, v'hamar Rabbi Yochanan moda Rabbi Eliezer b'she'ein maybe asham taloi. Rabbi Yochanan taught that Rabbi Eliezer says that we don't bring an asham taloi. Kasha. In fact, this is difficult. Now it's interesting because, of course, we're bringing a question on this brisa from Rabbi Yochanan, who's an Amora, but in any event, that's one of the reasons that it's only a kasha and not a tiyuvta. And so Hadron Allah Hora Kohen Mashiach, Hadron Allah Hora Kohen Mashiach, Hadron Allah Hora Kohen Mashiach. So tomorrow, God willing,
Isn't it? Are we saying it's a case where the Kohen Cohen did make the Beit HaMikdash Talmud?
Yes,
So
he
why,
did.
so why it's a
No, no,
Talmud? It's a
no,
Lamai.
no. Asham Toloi is a situation where he's not sure whether he made the base of
Oh,
Mikdash,
right.
right? As he's
I thought it was a Vadai.
no. In order to be an Asham Toloi, we're dealing with a situation where he walked in, he knows that he walked in, but he's not sure. Did he go over the Tuma place or did he not go over the Tuma
Okay,
place?
all right.
And so as a result, that's
Okay.
but yet, nonetheless, we're going to say that a Nasi is not subject to an Asham Toloi, at least according to Rabbi
But the
Yochanan.
Kohen
And so,
Gadol is, right?
but a
No,
Kohen Gadol,
it's not.
not with respect to the Beis Hamikdash, because again we said that the Beis Hamikdash is a situation where the Kohen Gadol is not going to be subject to it because of the reference to Kol Hakal, that you need to be like everybody in the rest of the congregation, and the Kohen Gadol is not like everybody in the rest of the congregation in connection with their sacrifice on
So
Yom
none of them could be subject, only
only an
Sham
individual,
Yid.
correct?
Sham Yid.
Only individual. Exactly. All right, we'll stop there. Wishing everybody a wonderful day, and we'll pick up with the third and final chapter of Horayot, God willing, tomorrow.
Thank you.